Hey, this is the World Advice Channel. What I want to talk about today is ideology that has been gaining steam in this world and has been around for quite some time. That I think, and not just I think, really needs to be discussed, which is the ideology of pacifism. Now, for this video, I will discuss my personal beliefs on pacifism, and in the future, I will do a more up to date series about this particular topic. That goes into further detail about my personal beliefs about this belief system. So let's get started. So, what are my personal beliefs about pacifism? My personal beliefs about pacifism is simply that pacifism is simply a flawed ideology. Because the problem with pacifism, even aside from things I could discuss, like how a lot of pacifists online actually act, which is, something I'll get into later on in this video. The truth of the matter is the biggest first problem with pacifism is that pacifism has this way of thinking where like violence or violence of any way shape of any type is wrong and is evil. Violence is terrible, it's this, it's that. It destroys people and this and that, and just gives you a lot of things that I don't really think you really need to really dwell on that much, you know, especially when you're in a lot of cases when you have to defend yourself. But anyway, the truth of to get back to the main point, biggest problem I have with pacifism is that it's a very extreme way of thinking. Why can't we as a species, and I've noticed this a lot for everything humans are involved with, particularly when it involves large groups of people, why can't we just have a balanced way of thinking? Why can't we just simply, instead of going from one extreme to another, like in the case of capitalism versus communism, the idea of either on one hand, completely there's no regulation, or all society cares about is money, this and that, to another ideology where people don't care about money and this and that whatsoever. Like stuff like that. Why can't we just find a good balance for things? And it's definitely no different for pacifism. Why can't we just simply realize, okay, if someone is not doing anything wrong to me, I should definitely do my best to, well, not do anything bad to them, like just in general not look forward to violence. Why do we as people have to always make everything so freaking extreme? And that's the thing about pacifism, is that it's a very extreme way of thinking. It's not even a case of like violence should be avoided, which any once reasonable sane person would realize. It's more the idea of violence is not only should be avoided, it should be despised, and people who even partake in some cases, you know, can even be despised. Like it's that way of thinking. Like the idea of it and even dwelling on it and stuff is evil and is wrong and immoral and all that type of stuff. That's the biggest problem. The first biggest problem, more like, I have with pacifism is that it takes things too far. Before I get to my second point that explains what I further believe, I just want to mention also something that I said I was going to mention about pacifists, which is very true about them, is that when you deal with pacifists and you tell them these sorts of things, especially for people who talk so much about peace and love and all this type of stuff, they sure as hell get pretty dicky about it and are actually pretty mean, which kind of shows you in the end of the day, that that they themselves don't practice what they preach, and if they don't practice what they preach, why should anyone practice what they preach? But yeah, that is very true about pacifists. Okay, they are so rude when you bring up these points. Like, you try to debate them or anything, they just say you're a warmonger, you're a psychopath, and this and that, instead of actually getting to the facts. Such as the fact of the matter is that, when it comes to the issues such as violence, to put it bluntly, um, is something, self-defense more like, is something people need to understand in order to defend themselves. Because this is my second point about the problem with pacifism, is that on a national level, pacifism is absolutely one of the worst ways of thinking. Because the problem with pacifism is that if nations like America, for example, which is the richest nation in the world, and a lot of other rich nations, who in a lot of cases are surrounded by very poor nations, were to simply just stay there and just simply not do anything, what do you think would happen? They would get invaded. Invasion and warfare and conflict and humans being cruel to each other is simply a part of the world's history. Okay, people, especially if you have something they want, you don't understand what kind of things go through people's heads, in all honesty. You don't know what people will do in order to make sure they get what they want. Okay, even look at YouTube comment sections and see how a lot of people act and how a lot of people talk, particularly to marginalized groups such as blacks, or you know Muslims and all that type of stuff, or even just certain ideologies and stuff. You quickly see that there's people can be really mean to each other. And from that, as an example in of itself, why should we as a species, as people, if there's such people in the world who are like that, ever feel that there's not a need for people to defend themselves? Because that's a problem with pacifism that they don't understand, is that nations who are rich would be targeted. Okay, so because that's the thing about having wealth. People want it. Let's just look at Mexico. Look at how freaking poor they are there. Okay, I'm not dissing Mexico, but I'm just putting it bluntly. If America didn't have a good military or something, what do you think would stop people from Mexico, especially with their drug cartel issue, from going into the United States and taking advantage of them, or even possibly having an invasion? And this is the problem pacifists don't seem to understand, is that this world is full of some really bad people who can sometimes be capable of doing some really terrible bad things to people. Like, that's the thing what I'm trying to say. And that goes along with my first point I was trying to make, where I fully said, why can't we just simply realize, okay, looking forward to violence, because there's a difference between something in reality versus in the movies. Why, why should we just simply realize it's best to avoid violence? And so, like, unlike the things America does in the world we live in, where they go around invading other countries and all that type of stuff all the time, why don't they just simply not do that? And just in general, why don't we just simply understand it's best to only really use war as an option if you need to defend yourself? And that's what I'm kind of getting at here. And that goes along with my first point I was trying to make. Just simply realizing it's not something to look forward to put it bluntly. It's not something you should look forward to, instead of creating an extreme ideology, which just makes people more likely to feel like, if anything, people who might even have interest in being in the military and stuff like that, makes them feel like they're a bad person, and shaming, and that way of shaming people for even seeing things that way. Because in general, if we shame people, then who's going to really serve in those particular fields anyway? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, like, that's what I'm trying to say here. And that's the biggest problem with pacifism, that has that ideology that needs to be discussed. A lot of people haven't been willing to discuss it. I'm going to be willing to discuss it. I'm not afraid of these type of people. I'm going to speak the honest truth, because it is just truth. Anyway, this is my video. If you like videos like this, remember to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. This is all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed it, and that's it. And simply put it, later.